A woman was hired as a nurse to a terminally ill old woman. She hadn't gotten out of bed for several years and didn't even talk, just stared at the ceiling with eyes as white as a laundered tablecloth and waited for death, which never came for her. The work was easy. Several times a day to unclench the hard gray mouth with her fingers and pour yogurt and liquid soup into it with small spoons. To bring the shit, to turn the old woman, who weighed no heavier than a large rag doll. And to wipe her yellow, as if waxed, skin with a special lotion to prevent bed sores. Then one day, the caregiver approached the old woman and saw that her eyes had turned as white as a dead bird's. Her mouth was open, and her jaw had dropped to the side. The woman called 911, even though she knew it wouldn't help. And so it turned out a tired woman in a dirty white coat sternly reprimanded her for calling to the dead. You should have called the morgue right away. True, they won't arrive before tomorrow morning anyway. There's a snowstorm outside. You tie her jaw with a handkerchief and open the windows in the room. Nothing will happen to her. I didn't want to spend the night in the same apartment with a dead old lady. But as luck would have it, the relatives of the deceased went to the regional center and also had to return in the morning. The nurse found a handkerchief in the closet, closed the dead eyes with the palm of her hand, trying not to look at the old woman's face and thinking about her own. About the bright future, for example, and its captivating particular trucker named John, with whom she had been dating for the 3rd month, and it was going to be a wedding. The nurse opened the window, covered the old woman with a thin woolen blanket for some reason, and left, shutting the door behind her. Strangely enough, she fell asleep quite quickly, but her sleep was shallow and uneasy. She dreamed of some gray port towns, bassy ship horns, seagulls hovering low over the stormy sea. Suddenly she thought that through the dream she heard shuffling footsteps, as if someone was walking down the corridor slowly, as if with difficulty. The woman sat up on the bed, wiped her eyes and then threw a robe on her shoulders and went out into the corridor. And immediately saw her old lady. She was leaning against the wall, her knees were bent. She seemed to be heading for the restroom. The nurse wasn't even frightened at first. Her first thought was, did the doctor make a mistake? What a horror, and she left the poor old woman with the window open, in the cold and blizzard. And she tied her handkerchief so tightly she almost suffocated her. It's strange that Grandma was walking, because for the last 2.5 years she hadn't gotten out of bed. What if she falls and breaks her femoral neck? The woman rushed forward and supported the old woman by the elbow. Careful, careful, why didn't you call me? The old woman was wobbly. She was even paler than usual and her eyes were closed. Suddenly she whispered weakly and hoarsely, "Help me." The nurse seemed to hear her voice for the first time. "Can I help you? Let me take you to bed. Maybe some hot tea and jam?" "No hands," she repeated monotonously. "Help me, I can't unbend them. Unbend my arms." Only then the nurse noticed that the old woman's arms were folded on her chest like a dead woman. "I'll be right there." But when she touched the old woman's hands, she pulled her hands away like a hot frying pan. They were icy and hard. Her eyes got used to the semi-darkness. The woman looked closely and saw violet spots on the old woman's face. In 3 leaps she was in her room, shut the door tightly and slid it shut with the desk. Her heart was pounding in her head with noise. This couldn't be happening, it just couldn't be. But it was for real. The dead old woman walked down the hallway carefully and slowly with her eyes closed and her face whitened. From behind the door came her faint voice. "Why did you leave? Help me, I can't unbend my arms." "Unbend them. "Come out. Open the door." The nurse lost track of time, but by the time the old woman was quiet, it was already light outside the window. Finally, the woman decided to look out of the room. There was no one in the corridor. She slowly reached the old woman's room, the door to which was tightly closed. The woman couldn't explain what was driving her, why she wouldn't just leave this apartment and forget about what had happened. The old woman was lying on the bed, her hands folded on her chest, her jaw tied with a handkerchief on her white cheeks. Only the blanket was lying crumpled on the floor for some reason. The woman waited for the car from the morgue, and then she left and never returned to that house.